Have you ever had issues when you're trying to cut a flare and you find out that after cutting your flare, it's excess? I've seen many tailors and aspiring designers make this mistake. There's more than where you want to attach it to, or it's not even enough, and then you have to start recutting and cutting. That is going to stop by the time you finish watching this video. When you're cutting your flare, it depends on how you fold your fabric. So now let's take for instance that this is our fabric. Assuming that this is where they measure the per yard, 1 yard, 2 yards, 3 yards, like that, and this other part is how long the fabric is. You know, you only get a flare from a circle, right? Take for instance that this is your circle. So we want to cut out the middle part of the circle, because this center is what you're going to attach to where you want to attach the flare to. Now the middle part of the circle has a midpoint. We want to know the distance from here to here, like that. So how do we go about that? From here to here is actually the radius. To get the radius, the formula for the radius is equals to the circumference that you're working with, whatever circumference you're working with, whether it's your waist circumference, the circumference of your neck, the circumference of the arm, wherever you're going to attach that flare to. That measurement is what you put at this point here, C. You replace that measurement with this C, divided by 2 pi. Divided by 2 pi. Just put it at the back of your mind that pi is 3.142. That is 3 inches, 142. That is what pi is. So for instance, our waist, we're working with our waist measurements, 28 inches. So instead of me writing circumference, I'll replace what is my circumference? It's 28. I write 28 divided by 2. And I said pi is 3.142. So we're going to replace pi with 3.142. This is actually mathematics, but just calm down, just relax. I know most of you are already saying, are we going into this math? Like, I'm not a math person. Just relax. It's not something, it's not deep. It's just the basics. Just understand this and that's all. Once you understand this, you'll be able to cut any flare you want to cut, the radius of any flare perfectly. So let's go on. 28, we'll bring 28 down. 2 multiplied by 3.142, we're going to have 6.28. 6.28. Now, if we divide 28 by 6.28, we should be having 4.46. It means that our radius, if we want to cut a flare for a 28 inches waist, from this point here, we're going to place our tape here, and we're going to measure 4.46. 4.46. That is when we are cutting a 360-degree flare. And now, it doesn't just end there. By the time we measure that, we have to make sure that our pattern paper or our fabric is folded into 4. So, you want to get a 360-degree flare, you have to fold your fabric or your pattern into 4. So, this is it. I'm folding it. I'll fold it like so. Make it equal. Then I will also fold it like this. So I'm going to have 4 folds. By the time we count it, let's count it. 1 fold, 2, 3, 4. That's how to fold a 360-degree flare. Now we have to look for a center point. When I say center point, because a 360-degree flare does not have any cut. So what do? You look for the point where, if I use this point, of course here has an opening and here has an opening. If I cut it here, I'm going to encounter a problem. So I have to look for the part that is sealed. This is a sealed part and this is a sealed part. So this part here is going to be our midpoint. This part here is going to be this part here. So we have our center, because by the time I open it, if I give a mark, for instance, let me mark here. And then when I open it, this is the center of our fabric. Can you see the mark I just marked? So that's the center of it. So that's why we folded. And then we folded to get the midpoint. If we were to fold the circle this way, that's the same thing we're going to get. So let's move on. So from this point, which is this point, we want to get our circumference. And then from here to here is the length of the dress, the length of the flare. From this point here, I have to measure 4.46 to get my radius. So let's assume that from here to here, when I place my tape, it gives me 4.46. From here to here, I measure 4.46 inches. From here to here, I measure 4.46 inches. From here to here, I measure 4.46 inches. And then from here to here, I measure 4.46 inches. You see this circumference here like so. If I decide to cut it, it's going to give me 28 inches. Now, don't forget that we're using this for the purpose of demonstration. So you go right ahead to cut the exact thing on your pattern paper. So we have 4.46 here. Now, from this point here, we need to measure our length, the length of our flare. Now, let's take for instance that from here to here is 14. And then from here to here is 14. I hope we can see this. From here to here is 14. From here to here is also 14. Now we have the length of our flare. I'm going to connect those points together like so. I'm just connecting the marks I indicated. So I've connected it together like so. So now let's cut it. We have a flare here. Now if I'm to open this circle, you will realize that this is actually a circle. We're going to be moving into the 270-degree flare. Now the 270-degree flare has 3 folds. So remember, we just did the 360-degree flare, which had 4 folds. Now we're going to be working on the 270-degree flare, which has 3 folds. So how do you do that? We're still going to fold the same way we did the 4, but what we'll be doing is to just cut out, because this is like one quadrant. If you look at our circle, if we're going to divide from this center point, we divide it down like so, and we divide here like so. So we have 1 quadrant, 1, 2, 3, 4. So for the 360-degree flare, we use the entire 4 folds. Now for this 270-degree, we're not going to be working with 4 folds. We'll be working with 3 folds. That means we have to take off this side. So we're working with from this point here like so, all the way to this point like so. So this part here is going to go off. So how do we do that on our fabric or on our pattern paper? We are going to still fold into 4, but the only thing we'll be doing is to take off one of the quadrants. So assuming that this 4 folds is 1 quadrant, 2 quadrants, 3 quadrants, and 4 quadrants, which was what we used for the 360-degree flare. Now we're going to be taking 1 off. So let me cut off 1 quadrant off, and you see that we have 3 folds. The difference is that the 360-degree flare is fuller than the 270-degree flare. While the 270-degree flare is fuller than the 180-degree flare, the 180-degree flare is fuller than the 90-degree flare. So, but we have other flares that are more than the 360-degree flare. We'll look into that when we are through with all these flares that I just made mention of. So now we have 3 folds. The formula, let me clean this up. So the formula for getting the radius of a 270-degree flare is the circumference divided by 2 pi multiplied by 4/3. That's the formula. So it's basically the same thing we did for the 360-degree flare. We're going to be doing that, but the only difference is that we'll be multiplying it by 4/3. Let's look at that shortly. Like I said, again, this is just a formula you're using. It's not like we're going deeply into mathematics itself, but once you understand this formula, it will help you a whole lot to get your perfect flare. Now, see, we're still using the same circumference, which is 28 divided by 2 pi. 2 pi We already said 2 pi is 6.28 because pi is 3.142. And we said when we multiply 2, okay, just for you to be clear, 2 times, remember this bracket means times, 3.142. When you multiply it by 4 over 3, this should bring us to 28 divided by, when we multiply this by this, it's going to give us 6.28 times 4 over 3. Now you can use your calculator to do this. Of course, to make it easier, we already know that 28 divided by 6.28, when we did for the 360-degree flare, it gave us 4.46. Instead of writing this, we replace this whole thing with what? 4.46. You multiply it by 4, and then we divide it by 3. Type on your calculator 4.46 multiplied by 4. It should give you 17.84. Now we're going to divide 17.84 by 3, and the total it will give to us is 5.95. So our radius, therefore, the radius for a waist 28 when we are cutting a 270-degree flare is 5.95. So remember that you're going to be using your tape to take this measurement, and you're going to be using the part that has inches. So I'm going to be placing my tape at this center point, and I'll be marking from here to here 5.95, 5.95. And so back to what we did for the 360-degree. This is our fabric. I'm going to look at the parts that have a fold. This part doesn't even have any fold at all, as you can see. Neither does the under have any part that has a fold. So it means that this part is going to be the bottom of our flare. Those parts that are not sealed is going to be the bottom of our flare. While we're going to use this angle for our mid points, because there's a fold here and there's also one fold here. So this center point is this point here. Let's assume that from here to here is 5.95. And so from here to here is another 5.95. And then from here to here is another 5.95. If I cut the circumference, and now what I need to do next is to measure the length. We're still using the same length, which is 14 inches. Let's assume that from this point to this point is 14. From this point to this point is another 14. From here to here is another 14. 14. And from here to here is another 14. So this is just for illustration purpose. So if I'm to cut the length of my flare, which is this, I have a 270-degree flare. You can see that the flare is not full. Sorry, don't mind the edges. You know, we're just using, we didn't measure exactly the measurements. So that's why the curve is not well curved. But this is just for us to have an idea of how to go about cutting a 270-degree flare. If I'm to place this circle here, you can see that, remember that I cut off one part, one quadrant of the flare. I cut off one quadrant of the circle. So now I am left with from this point to this point. So this part here is where I'm going to go connect to my waist. I hope we're clear on that. So that's for a 270-degree flare. So let's move on to 180-degree flare. A 180-degree flare is in 2 folds, because a 270 is in 3 folds and it's fuller than a 180-degree flare, which is in 2 folds. So the more the fold, the fuller the flare. I hope you get. The less the fold, the less the volume of the flare. Let's assume that this is my fabric, or this is my pattern. And like I explained earlier, this is the width of my fabric. This is the length of the fabric. I'm going to fold this into two. Remember I said 180-degree flare is folded into two. So we have two folds here. 1, 2. Two folds means two quadrants. That's one quadrant and the second quadrant. In other words, it means that in this circle, we are going to be doing away with two quadrants. So we're just dealing with 180-degree flare is just two quadrants. That's what it means. So our flare is just going to be from here to here. That's the volume. That's why it's not as full as the one that has 3 quadrants or 4 quadrants. Now we need to look for the part that has a seal. This is where the fold is. So we'll be using this part as our center point, which is this point here. So what we are trying to get is also the radius of the flare. That is the radius here before we cut our length. So the radius of the 180-degree flare will be circumference divided by 2 pi times 2 over 1. We already know that because we're still working with the same waist circumference, which is 28 inches. When we did that calculation, we had 28 divided by 6.28 times 2 over 1. Now 28 divided by 6.28 is 4.46, and we multiply that by 2 divided by 1. So that should give us 8.92 inches. So therefore our radius is 8.92. It means that from this point here to this point, we are going to be having 8.92. From here to here, 8.92. That's what we're going to be taking for the radius of our flare. So we already said this is our point. This point here is this point here. So if we assume that from here to here is 8.92, 8.92, 8.92, and from here to here is 8.92. So now we have our radius. Now the next thing we need to do, like we've done for the other types of flare, is to measure the length. So assuming that the length, we're still using the same length, which is 14 inches. So from this point to this point is 14. From here to here is another 14. From here to here is another 14. So if I cut that up, I should end up with this. So like I said, it's half. So this is what we have as our 180-degree flare. And then from this point to this point is the length. And that's exactly what we have here. So we're going to be looking at the 90-degree flare. The 90-degree flare does not require any fold. We're not folding anything here. We're just going to take one point, the midpoint. Don't also forget that it's going to be 1. We're using just 1 quadrant for the 90-degree flare. To make it easier for you, 1 quadrant of a circle is a 90-degree flare. 2 quadrants is a 180-degree flare. 3 quadrants is a 270-degree flare, while 4 quadrants is a 360-degree flare. So we have other types of, by the time we add more quadrants, that is more than 4 quadrants, the flare becomes fuller, and we'll also look into that. So let's quickly look at how we're going to the formula for the 90-degree flare. Your circumference divided by 2 pi times 4. So we already know that all the times we've been doing that, we had 4.46, right? When we divided our waist circumference, which is 28 divided by 6.28. So it means that this 2 pi is 6.28. So in total, it gave us 4.46. Now we multiply 4.46 times 4, and that should give us 17.84. Our radius for a 90-degree flare for this waist measurement of 28 inches is 17.84. So do well to work with your own measurements. We're using 28 just for this tutorial purpose. So like I said earlier, anywhere you're applying your flare to, do well to replace that number on this circumference part. So now 17.84 is what we're going to be measuring from this point to this point, from this point to this point, and from this point to this point. Now, this point here is our midpoint of the circle. That is where this point is. Let's assume from here, if we measure from here to here, we have 17.84 inches. From here to here, we have 17.84 inches. And from here to here, 17.84 inches. The next thing you know we're going to do, we're going to measure the length. So from this point here, we'll measure our length. Let's say from here to here is 14 inches. From here to here is 14. And from here to here is 14. Now we're going to cut. So I'm cutting the radius part and now the bottom of the flare. So this is what we have for our 90-degree flare. If I'm to place this here, you see that this part here, the curve here is this curve here, and it's just for one quadrant. That is how you cut your 90-degree flare. A 720-degree flare would require us to have double of the 360-degree flare. What do I mean by that? For instance, this is another 360-degree flare. In other words, we're saying when you have a double of the 360-degree flare, it's going to give you a 720-degree flare. Obviously, from calculation, if you add 360 plus 360, 0, this is 6 plus 6 is 12. You add 1 here, 3 plus 3 is 6 plus 1, 7. That gives us 720-degree flare. So just put it at the back of your mind that you're going to be folding your fabric into 8. How do you go about that? So let's assume that this is my fabric, or this is my pattern, and I want to cut a 720-degree flare. I need to fold my fabric or my pattern into 8 because a 720-degree flare requires 8 quadrants. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 quadrants. How do you fold that? We fold the same way we folded the 360-degree flare. And then we fold. So let me do a recap. This is the fabric. We fold like so. Then we fold again like so. We have 4 folds here. We fold again so that it can give us 8 folds. So now let's count it. Let's see if it's up to 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because it's sealed here. So 6, 7, 8. So we have 8 quadrants here. We have 8 folds here. So now what do I do next? I have to look for the part that is sealed, like we did on the 360-degree flare. Here is sealed and here is sealed. So it means that this point here is going to be the center of my circle. And that is where I'm going to measure my radius from. So the formula to get a 720-degree flare is your circumference divided by your 2 pi multiplied by 1/2. So if I were you, I would write out these formulas, probably write it on a notepad, paste it on the wall of my sewing room, so that anytime I'm cutting, if I forget, I can just refer back to the formulas, and there I go. With time, the more you keep doing it, the more you get used to the formula. If we're going to do this calculation that we've been using before, because we're still using the waist circumference of 28, so our circumference, which is 28, divided by 6.28, 6.28, remember that it is replacing 2 pi. So it gave us 4.46. And when we multiply that by 1 and divide by 2, it should give us 4.46 46 divided by 2. And that should give us 2.23. It means that from this point here, this is our center point. Remember that this is the center point, and so it's as if we placed this 360-degree flare on each other, on top each other. So we're cutting it at once, because at the end of the day, we'll still merge them by the side. We'll open here up, and we would open here up. I'm looking at the sealed part here, and I'm looking at the sealed part here. Obviously, this is my center point. And so if I'm to measure 2.23 for my radius, I'll measure, for instance, from here to here is 2.23. And from here, remember that I'm not taking from here, I'm still taking from the center point. My measurement, my tape, every measurement I'm taking for the 2.23 is coming from the center point. Don't make the mistake of, placing your tape here and measure 2.2, you get it wrong. So this is how your fabric should be. This is where you're looking at your center point. From here to here, 2.23. From here to here, 2.23. From this place again to this place is 2.23. So if I'm to cut that, so the next thing I would do is to measure my length. So we're still working with length 14. So let's assume that from this point here to this point is 14. And then from here, remember that this time around, I am not placing my tape on only one point. I'm moving my tape around the curve of the radius. So from here, I place my tape and it gives me 14. From here, I place my tape downwards and it gives me 14 inches length. And now when I connect this together and make a cut, I would end up with this. If I am to open this up, it's going to give me 2 circles, which is, we already know that this is 300, and a full circle gives you 360 degree. So it's like you're having double of it. And so the way to attach it together is just to open one side up. A 360 degree, a full circle doesn't have any opening. You open one side up, and then you open the other side up, and so you connect this part together. You can make a seam. You can hold this side together so that you just have only one opening for your zip, where you're going to attach your zip to, or whatever you're attaching to it. So the opening will just maybe be at the back or by the side, maybe sideways like this. And then maybe you're putting a side zip to one side. So you can work around it. The most important thing is that you've got an accurate radius for your flare. While we're doing this, did you imagine having a 3 circle, like a 360 degree flare, in 3 places, or in 4 places, or in 5 places, or in 6, 7, 8, 9, 10? The more you can go on and on. It just depends on your material. Don't forget that the more you have, the fuller the flare, the more material it will require. If I add one more flare, one more circle to this, it's going to give me a 1080 degree flare. And so the formula for that is this multiplied by 1/3. So because it's a 3 circle, we're dividing it by 3. If it's a 4 circle, we're dividing by 4. If it's a 5 circle, we're dividing by 5. So for a 2 circle, which is 720 degree flare, we divided by 2. So for a 1080 degree flare, we'll be dividing by 3 because it will require us to have 3 circles. And so 3 circles require us to have, so if we have 3 circles, let's say this is another circle here. And so, this is the quadrant. So it means we're going to having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So we'll be having 12 quadrants for our 1080 degree flare. Just like that. So it's just like we are adding 360. If we add 360 in 3 places, 1080 degree flare. Just like that. The more you keep going, if you have 5 circles, you're going to divide by 5. and it means that you're adding 360 in 5 places. So that's for this video. If you know you found value watching this video, please do well to give this video a thumbs up. Click on your notification bell. Don't forget to leave a comment below this video. Ask any questions you want and I'll be here to answer all of your questions. If this is your first time of being on this channel, please do well to click on the subscribe button if you're yet to subscribe, and also share this video with your friends, those people you know that will be in need of this kind of content. Please do well to share this video with them. Do have a great day and I'll see you on the next one.